got up before dawn just to bring you
Top of the morning from beautiful downtown Cokie.
Hi, the top of the morning. The top of the morning to all of you.
Hi, top of the morning. Top of the morning.
We're creating the Maryland Women's Heritage Center because all the materials that we had growing up in school and still, unfortunately, a lot of what the children get today include very little information about the contributions of girls and women. And we hope to inspire both girls and boys and women and men by learning this other half of history that's been omitted from what they've had so far. What we say in the Heritage Center is that we're adding her story to history to tell our story so that we make it whole. And we're about to, this summer we will have our first home, which will be temporary for 2 or 3 years. We are having at that site some of the components that we will have eventually in the permanent home. One of the components is the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame, which you may have heard of, and that was begun in 1985. And each year since then, a group of up to 5 women, both living and deceased, have been inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame. Incredible women like Harriet Tubman and Rachel Carson and Margaret Brent, who was the first woman who demanded actually the right to vote. She demanded 2 votes, and she didn't get either one because she was a woman. But she was the first woman in the colonies to actually ask for the right to vote. And so they're all in the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame, and 5 are inducted each year. However, after a wonderful ceremony in the legislature, and then a lovely dinner at Government House with the First Lady of Maryland, all that remains is a small website and a new brass piece that goes on a plaque that's at the Maryland Law Library. So the Hall of Fame is not, although it's such renowned people and so many wonderful contributions, has only consisted really of a plaque. And we're going to make it real, where people can come, learn about these contributions, be inspired by them, and hopefully shape an exciting future based on that inspiration. Heritage Center will be a place that has a gallery that has the Women's Hall of Fame. It will have another that honors everyone else, all the unsung heroines who are in our families, our communities, our organizations, our schools, who have contributed so much but whose names we'll never know. And we ask all Marylanders really to let us know the stories of the unsung heroines and their wives. It may be in their lives, it may be their wives, their mothers, their daughters, their sisters, and their grandmothers, their teachers, so many that the names are numerous, but their contributions have not been recorded or acknowledged. So that will be a second area. We'll also have a student learning area, which will be highly interactive, where students can do activities based around these women and the unsung heroines in their own lives, as well as looking at leadership for the future. So we will have a leadership training program that'll be especially for girls and women. We're hoping that eventually boys will also partake to learn to respect women and girls more, and that it's something for everybody. We will also have at the Heritage Center an area where we will have a gift shop where we will be selling materials, books, artwork, and other crafts made by or about Maryland women. And finally, we'll have an ongoing place, a forum which is a real forum where people can come from the community or from organizations to talk about emerging issues, so that it won't just be a passive place to come and look, that it will be a place where people can come to gather to analyze current issues that are of importance to girls and women and their families and their communities and our state, and take action so that it really has that whole scope. Maryland is what has been the first state that began the Maryland Women's History Project in 1980, and it's been going on continuously since that time. We are the only state that sustained the development of women's history materials each year during this time. And Linda Shevitz, with whom you'll speak at a different point, will coordinated that and will be able to tell you more about it. But there is no place in the country yet. There are some halls of fame, there are some women's heritage trails. There is no place that brings together the components that we're doing in a state-based center that tells about the women, both renowned and unsung, has the leadership programs and educational programs and performances, and really is a comprehensive center on all the aspects of the lives of girls and women. We have not launched a capital campaign yet. We've learned a lot that has a specific name, and that we have not done. Of course, we have been doing fundraising. We've gotten some funding from the state of Maryland to help us with the planning phase, realizing that this is a national first. And we've had good support from the Maryland women legislators in particular, but also a number of the men, because they've had to all pass it. Because Maryland was also the first state to have a women's legislative caucus in the nation. And so that was another one of our firsts, and they've been very supportive about the importance to start something like this, where families, students, scholars, tourists, convention goers can all come to learn, to teach us, to share information, and to take action about issues that are of importance to them. Well, the event today with Cokie Roberts, who many people know nationally, is important to us for two reasons. One, Cokie Roberts is a member of our honorary board for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, which makes us very proud, and she is a Maryland woman. And secondly, that because of her fame and renown, that helps others realize how important this information is. She's written several books on women's history. Ladies of Liberty is one, and she's done other work. And the book we're particularly focusing on today is the updated and expanded version of her book, We Are Our Mother's Daughters. And we are very pleased that because of this kind of an event, people will become more aware of the significance of the contributions of women and girls, and will realize that it's important to have that other half of history if we're to really understand how to move forward in the best way and the most equitable way for everybody. Maryland women are written up in so many books about women's history in particular, because they were left out of the traditional books, and we've made some progress from when we started the project in 1980, and that now some of the social studies textbooks, for example, will have the American Revolution, and they'll have a sidebar on women in the American Revolution, and maybe another box on blacks in the American Revolution. But our goal is ultimately not to need an African American History Month or Women's History Month, but to have us all included all year round. And that's one of our prime goals in doing this. Maryland women have been important throughout the history of this country. The first woman to ask and demand the right to vote was Margaret Brent, and she was a landowner and a woman. She actually demanded 2 votes, 1 for each, and she got neither one because of being a woman, even though she was literally running the state at that time. We also have Maryland woman Anna Ella Carroll, who was a military advisor to Abraham Lincoln. We have leadership in our state with Lily Carroll Jackson and Juanita Jackson Mitchell in both the original times of the NAACP, but also in starting the NAACP Youth Corps that is a national at this point, but came from here. And most people who are renowned know Harriet Tubman, who was from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and Rachel Carson, who was really the mother of the environmental movement, who wrote Silent Spring in her home in Silver Spring, Maryland. We also have many firsts, even through today. We have the first woman mayor of Baltimore right now, Sheila Dixon, the first woman mayor of Annapolis after 300 years, who's Ellen Moyer. We have the first woman conductor of a major symphony orchestra, which is also Marin Alsop, which is the Baltimore Symphony. So history is still being made, or we like to call it her story, is still being made today in many arenas. Historically, it has been historic. For the most part, the historians, once we had people, there was always oral history. There was history passed down from generation to generation within particular cultural groups, within particular subcultures and regions. There were things that were passed down in non-traditional ways that women were able to communicate through things like quilts or diaries, because they couldn't be published or they couldn't even have their music be played. But the way the historians define history, it seemed to come out being largely male, largely white, and largely political and military. We had to memorize a lot of battles when I went through school. And they excluded things that were about how people lived, what people felt, what people did, and they excluded most of us, really. And they put some of those that had to do with human beings who are not white and male and in the military or in political office into sociology or anthropology. And when we're looking at redefining history from a woman's perspective and a multicultural woman's perspective, we're talking about a lens that includes all of us, includes the renowned and the everyday lives of people who contribute every day. Well, we're hoping that it will help excite people, because we've been so excited creating this national first. We're hoping that it will help people to understand much more of the roots and the intermingled roots of many of us, which have often been segregated when they've been told, and some of the stories are much more complex than that. It will also help inspire girls to see that they have limitless options, that these things have been done over history. Strong women have been there all along, particularly different roles within different cultures. Or in World War II, Rosie the Riveters were drafted into the workforce and then they were sent packing back home. Once the men came back, not because they couldn't do the jobs, but because of societal values. And so we are hoping that girls and boys will be inspired to see that they have wide open options, and we want to give them the support through leadership training, through having broad-based experiential opportunities that will open up options for girls and boys. But also, one of my fondest hopes is that when more boys and men learn about the strength and contributions of women, we'll actually see much greater respect for girls and women. And if we have a greater respect, I hope that we would see less abuse. So we see it as having potential to impact a lot of everyday issues that are extreme importance to us.
And how can people become involved?
People can become involved in many ways. You can look at our website, which is mdwomen'sheritagecenter.org. We need people to volunteer to work on our committees. Once we open, we need people to be docents and tour guides, and we will train those people. People, we hope, will support us financially. Our former First Lady, Kendall Ehrlich, liked to say that if every woman in Maryland gave $1, we would be able to open. And I would always tag on to that, and if every man in Maryland who had a mother gives $1, we definitely will be ready to open. So we see that as something that would be important to everybody in Maryland. And we hope that people will also tell us the stories, send in their unsung heroines. They can recognize them through the Heritage Center. We will preserve and transmit their stories and the names of these individuals that are so important to them. And people also can get cards from the center, which we'll send out when they want to honor or memorialize somebody as well. Well, in 1980, I started the Maryland Women's History Project when I was serving on the Maryland State Commission for Women. We then went and asked the State Superintendent of Schools, who at that time was David Hornbeck, if they would be interested in collaborating with us to develop educational materials, and he was totally enthusiastic about doing it, and it was a collaboration between those two agencies. The Women's Hall of Fame, which began in 1985, was largely a collaboration between the Maryland Commission for Women and the Maryland women legislators. And what I want to add to that really is that one of the things important in the ways that women often can work together, which sometimes differs maybe because of how we've been raised, but women work collaboratively more often, and when I say whose idea it is, I thought of it and proposed it first, but the partners, like Linda Shevitz, who I mentioned, and others have been equal partners in this creation, because women have this capability of working together for an end. We manage to do when we have very little budget and make things happen for our families. And in this case, we think it's important for the society not to preserve and transmit all that richness that has never been.
Sure.
Okay. Well, we're very thrilled to have this luncheon today with Cokie Roberts, who's a member of our honorary board, and this is the first time we've actually called upon her to do an activity with the Women's Heritage Center. But we're thrilled she's on our board, and most of us love her political acumen, her wit, and her writing about women's history. And today we're especially acknowledging the new release of her updated version of We Are Our Mother's Daughters. So could you tell us what's different about this book from the previous version?
Well, 10 years have passed. So a lot has changed in women's lives in this country, mostly for the better. And so there are new women to write about, new milestones to celebrate. But you know, the great thing about being here to do that is the wonderful work that you even in your formative stages have been able to do with the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, because the women that you have found and sung and allowed children to find and sing is really terribly important, and it's a great thing. And it's, you know, once you get a real place up and going, it's going to be very, very special for the citizens of Maryland, but especially for the children of Maryland.
Can you say something about your mom now? About your, you know, with the book, how the book pertains to, okay? And action.
Well, the book isn't really about my mom. The book is about women in various roles in society. But my mom certainly plays a role and is a wonderful presence in my life. I'm very lucky she's 93 years old, and it's great that she is with us.
Absolutely. What got you interested in the importance of writing about women's history so much as you do?
Well, I was writing a great deal about contemporary women and politics, and women's influence on politics as Wait a minute, that's the sign. Women as voters, as politicians, all of that. And of course, having covered American politics and Congress as long as I have, I spend a great deal of time with the Founding Fathers. And I figured I needed to know what the women of the era were up to. So that's really what got me.
Well, let me, historically I work with the House of Ruth a lot, and they say 1 in every 4 women will be abused by the time they're 18, but when you go to change legislature, we need more women in that area, I think, because that means 1 in every 4 judges and 1 in every 4 lawyers are perpetrators. And the laws on the books are old. So when we used to think of women as chattel and so forth, I want you to answer, I'm saying more than but you go to jail longer for stealing a car than you do for raping a woman or molesting a child.
Well, the problems with domestic violence are huge, and my mother was very influential in starting the House of Ruth, but also in getting legislation passed to provide federal seed money to local jurisdictions to deal with that problem. And our awareness of it is certainly much greater than it's ever been. And that is progress to some degree. Obviously. As with all of these things, there's plenty of room for improvement.
We know that you know somewhat about the Women's Heritage Center and what our vision is and what we're creating, and that we will have a home beginning this summer, which will be at least for the next 2 or 3 years before we move into our permanent home. Could you talk a little bit about why you think it's important to be creating the Maryland Women's Heritage Center and hopefully serve as a model for other states to create such centers for?
Because if we don't know about the history of women, we don't know half of our history. And we have an incomplete view of the men, as well as not knowing about these terribly important and interesting and fun to meet women. And it is in some ways erroneous, actually, to study history without knowing what the other hand is.
Yes, actually, Cokie and I drove past the building
Right.
on our way over here.
I wanted to have signs, future home up.
Yes, we're going to get that up there, and we will have you over there when we open. It's very
I probably feel the way a lot of authors do, which is that I love writing books in theory, and I love them when they're done. This is another story altogether, but when I'm not writing a book, which is right now, I feel bereft. So this book, which initially came out as a much smaller little collection of essays, when this book came out as a much smaller collection of essays, I really did like the process, and like especially the learning, which of course is what I do as a reporter.
Right.
And so that's when I realized that I really basically never want to be not writing a book.
Kind of feel the same way. It's exciting, the creative flow that goes through.
Right.
Okay, I'm now in the book. We're opening the book of 16. Go ahead.
These are done.
Any other questions, Joe?
One of the things that we've been looking at so much is how we inspire upcoming generations of both girls and boys. What would you like to see, maybe as a result of all this learning that might go on through your writing and your work and the Maryland Women's Heritage Center?
I want girls and boys to have some sense of the contributions that women have made to our country and to our state, and thereby to value them more, but also in the case of the girls, especially to value themselves more, and to understand that even though women might not have had titles throughout history. They've been doing all the jobs throughout history. And they've been doing it while having to do much more difficult things than they have to do today. They were pregnant all the time. They had diseases that would come through and kill 2 of their children in a week. They were just the hardship of daily life was so intense. And still with that, they were such patriots and so dedicated to whatever it was that they were doing in terms of work. Young women today and girls, a sense of sort of fortitude. There's a certain sissiness out there right now. That I can't do it all. Well, I don't know why not. Women before you always have. It's the, sort of suck it up and get it over with.
You've heard of Anne Bradstreet, right? Bradstreet, Anne Bradstreet. And I think it's Worthington was the first woman that actually wrote about literally carrying a gun under her arm while she was holding babies and stuff like that. It's true. I mean, that's what. So what do you advise young women today? What would you advise them? You said suck it up, but no, that's a good thing. But I mean, how can they get involved so that they can learn besides the Women's Heritage Center? Because we're going to be a while yet. But what could they do? Get into a different kind of workforce?
No. I think it's just understanding it's not so terrible. Relax. You can do it. You can raise kids, and they'll be fine. And probably only have 2 or 3 of them. Not 8 or 10 of them. And it's so much greater.
I was having Peggy Bradford, this is Jill.
She died on first when I was 14 years old. I did write a book and tribute to her. So I love this idea of we are our mother's daughters because I believe